Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Alexander Augustesen, CEO and co-founder of Zuuvi. Alexander, it is such a pleasure to see you, and I am very excited to not only talk about creativity, but I think maybe a new term, creative infrastructure. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's a huge pleasure to be on stage with you. So thank you for the invitation, and looking forward to have a valuable discussion and talk here today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Why don't we start then at the very beginning then? Why don't you tell us why you started Zuuvi?
Thank you. A really, really good question. I think where I come from is from the agency background. And what I felt by firsthand was this situation where I firsthand looked at a full creative cycle, which was really manual and it took really long time. And then on the other side, I looked at our, let's say, private life, and I looked at we are consuming more and more digital content. So there was a mismatch between this process and then that we are consuming as private more content. And then I looked at that process and say, do I believe that we're gonna consume more content? Yes, I do. What about this scattered process? Is that time to then optimize that? So I felt this firsthand with brilliant creative, basically leaving the studio perfect, and then arriving in the market broken. And nobody has actually built this infrastructure layer between the big idea and its execution at scale. And I think to me, it was never ever about blaming the queuing system or the vendors in this process. It was more about that this system needs to be redesigned, and we called that the creative infrastructure. And that's basically the layer between how the brand communicates and what we as private persons are seeing when interacting with the brand. That's what we call the creative infrastructure. And that's where we started from.
It's interesting because probably people hadn't really thought about creative infrastructure until we came into the age of AI. Or look, AI has been around for a long time, but AI in our field. Now let's just for a second talk about the big idea, because I know that, for example, at Cannes, there's so many extraordinary winners, and they win because of the big idea. But they as global brands, they also often sincerely believe in localization. And I guess that's where there's a little bit of a breakdown. You use the word break, that sometimes as people try so hard to localize things, the big idea just gradually gets eroded to the point that you have something that may not resemble what was the winning idea in the first place. Is that also what you're seeing from a practical creative standpoint?
Yeah, it definitely is, right? So I think the situation that we're looking at, and of course, yes, with AI in that blend, then is just escalating, right? So I think the whole idea about we're sitting in HQ and then we have a fantastic idea that then we convert down to a brief. And then from that brief, of course, that needs to be scaled across agencies, across markets, across languages, across product lines. And when this idea, that fantastic idea in the beginning, starts traveling down this journey, then there is compromises in each step, which will then result in what was this original idea? What hits the market is not necessarily then the same, because all these compromises, if you connect them, and then basically what hits us is not necessarily the same impact as the great idea was. I think some of the things is like being really radical in terms of it, maybe we start with a huge TVC, a great video that we go full TV advertisement on, but then when it end up out, it's a static image that doesn't say the full story that we originally had. If you just look at the content piece gap that is there, right? So the whole idea about this, where I really think it's a shame, right? It is a shame that we're doing so well in the beginning, but doing the execution and the final result, which it is, we are not really good. And to enable that for sure, then we have fantastic tools in place. We have fantastic agencies as well that are doing a great job. But to me, it's about rethinking that whole process. So we are starting talking about what is the infrastructure, how does it look like, and that's basically where, of course, we're trying to come into the picture. But the original, this big idea about having a fantastic concept in HQ, and then when it travels out to the end customers, that's where the broken gaps is, and that gap we need to close that. If it stands to me.
Very interesting that you've talked about gaps because just this week, the WFA, the World Federation of Advertisers, along with Cannes Lions, has surveyed marketers around the world just to ask them a little bit about what some of their challenges are with creativity. And it's fascinating how those marketers, some of the largest, are echoing exactly what you've been saying. Let me just ask you, I'd like to talk more about creative infrastructure because it is a solution. But before we get there, let me just ask you, because you must interact with so many global brands, what do they tell you is their biggest challenge? I'd be curious to hear it from you.
Yeah. What global brands tells me is that they say it's about being creative and it's about scaling the creative operation. But what we then figured out when we narrow that down universally, it's not creativity. It's that creativity doesn't survive this journey. That's the issue, right? Because back to the original idea, that is really creative. But then that creativity, that's of course what they want to achieve. What they want to have is that they want to be more efficient. So there we are talking about operational excellence. They want to have commercial excellence as well. So of course, scaling the commercial impact that marketing are doing on the global P&L, etc. And then they want to have brand elevation when there is, of course, when it comes to brand compliance as well. Because when you are a global brand, it's so important that you stay compliant. And so that are, like, let's call it the three avenues that they are talking about. But their biggest challenge is basically that they want to achieve creativity, and they do that in the first idea, but staying creative while traveling down the journey down to the final impression. That's the gap where creativity don't survive, right? So they want to stay creative, but they can't because of limited processes, because of limited infrastructure, and then they also want to scale that process. So of course they want to be more efficient. Time to market. We have ad fatigue, right? We are bombarded with a lot of impressions from brands that want to tell us something through social media, through the screens in the airport, through the television, and they need to stand out. And we are so much hit by ad fatigue, right? Really early on. So if they cannot scale it, if we cannot give the engines more content, they will be hit by fatigue. So of course they also need to scale the operation of delivering relevant content to the relevant people, and therefore as well, I think that's also a killer to the creativity because it needs to go so fast, it needs to travel so fast down this journey. So what the global brands say is the biggest challenge is staying creative while scaling. I think you can sum it down to that.
And also, of course, it's all about the consumer or the customer. So it's how do you, offer the most relevant message that conveys your big idea to that end user or that potential customer, and that has to be every marketer's, concern. So then it sounds like creative infrastructure is not only a solution to bridge these gaps, but it might also be a way of offering real-time solutions as well, given just the speed of relevance today. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, for sure. But you're completely right, right? It's basically that it is about enabling brands to translate this big idea into relevant real-time activations. I think that's the original vision about it. Because if you just take, let's say, a global bank, right? They can of course take one approved master campaign and then instantly produce hundreds of localized on-brand ads that are also triggered by real market signals. But in this process, I think Yes, it's about being efficient, but it's also about being compliant. The most important currency we have as a brand, to me, that's the brand value, right? So if we start jeopardizing what we look like and what people, they can easily recognize us, if we start jeopardizing that with a democratized setup where every market, where every hub region we have do it in their own way, then you will start having a brand drift, and you will not anymore look like the same brand. So it's, of course, it's starting by, normally we see it starting by setting the global guardrails up, right? Not by just simple locks, but by system design, which is, to us, system design is creative infrastructure. So how again do you travel as if you are a global bank, that you can basically take this one master and campaign, and then you can instantly produce hundreds of variations of it, because I think the creative infrastructure lives over that. With that, I mean, fantastic tools is in place to enable you to produce 10,000s of variants. But the interesting fact is, are we staying compliant? Are we staying relevant when doing so? And that's, of course, about also connecting existing tools in the process. It's about connecting existing teams in the process, but it's about designing the system so it fits your process from the big idea to what ends up in the market.
Reminds me of something else, which is probably a bit dated and a bit old-fashioned, but there used to be a term called freedom in a framework. I don't know, does that ring a bell with you? And it sounds like part of the process may be to almost supercharge that freedom in a framework, to be able to know what can be changed, what can't be changed, what would take away, what would be compliant in this country, and so on. I have maybe just another question, although I could perhaps speak all day to you, but because this is such a fascinating topic, because it's going along with almost the speed of marketing and the speed of culture. But uh, and again, a little bit off the topic, but so many brands today think of AI in terms of cost savings. Now, I'm sure this indeed can be a cost saver, but I'm also wondering how it might also enable growth, or maybe not only save money, but make money. Can you address that?
Yeah, for sure. And as I see it, of course, like the entry of AI in the whole marketing operation is fantastic, right? Both internally, but also externally. When we are launching campaigns, when we are changing and doing this big idea and send it out in the market. But I think how we address it is basically that if we see it, let's try to be visual, right? So we see it as cost saving is basically the floor, but not the ceiling. So when you can produce thousands of relevant on-brand activations in real time because you have the creative infrastructure in place, you also stop leaving these market opportunities on the table. Because basically the brands that win the next decade, to me, are the one that can cut production costs. They are basically the ones that used AI to show up faster, more relevantly, and more constantly than their competitors. And that's basically the interference of where we are building. So I think it's about enabling the fantastic things about AI, but also regulate it from a brand compliance perspective. Because if you don't set guardrails, then of course that AI interference in the process of launching and building campaigns, that will again jeopardize your brand. So if you don't put these guardrails into place, then to me you're jeopardizing your brand. But of course, it is an escalator of how fast you can do it and how relevant you can do it, and that's of course the great thing about being a modern tech company is also that like the AI is of course built into it. So as a concrete example, when we are working with global enterprises, then of course it's about security, but it's also about having what we call the brain. The brain is basically a personal AI model that learns exactly how your brand looked like, what you're doing with history versioning, all these kind of things. So it learns your brand and your processes in the creative infrastructure, and then it doubles down on it, and then it enables you to go faster. right? That's basically the concept under the creative infrastructure. That's what we call the AI brain.
I have to say that I am looking forward to continuing this conversation because you've just had so many other concepts pop up in my head, and I'm thinking that maybe we'll have to continue this in terms of some specific examples and also maybe a more philosophical conversation about the sea of sameness that some people talk about with AI. But I think for now, you have just offered such extraordinary information, as I say, so well timed with the research that just came out from WFA and CAN. So I congratulate you on everything that you've done, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you very much, Alexander.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's has been a fantastic pleasure, and yeah, thank you for covering a really interesting topic, of course. And I think the relevant and the timing is really interesting. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being with me today. Yeah, thank you.
A pleasure. A pleasure. The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal stories. Thanks so much for watching. If you find this kind of content helpful, please click like or subscribe. Again, thanks so much.